I thought moving in with my parents would give my twins and me a safe place to rebuild after my divorce. For a while, it worked until my brother's baby arrived. Suddenly, my children didn't matter. Their artwork vanished from the fridge, their laughter was too loud, and one day I came home to find their beds shoved into a cold, damp basement. Babies deserve the best rooms, my mother said. They didn't know I'd been planning our escape for weeks, or that what happened next would change our family forever. This isn't just about leaving, it's about choosing to breathe again. When the divorce papers were signed, I told myself the hardest part was over. I didn't yet understand that over was just a word, and reality had a way of stretching pain far beyond its deadlines. At 38, with two 10-year-old children and a job that demanded every ounce of my focus, I had nowhere to go but back to my parents' house. Ellen and Richard Quinn lived in the same colonial-style home where I'd grown up. It felt strange walking my kids up the same brick steps I'd climbed as a child, the air carrying the same faint scent of lilacs from the hedge by the front porch. They smiled as they welcomed us in, and for a moment I believed this could be the safe harbour I needed. Caleb clutched his sketchpad, the one he took everywhere, while Maya balanced her clarinet case against her hip. "You'll each have a place to set these down," I told them, as if the promise itself could make it true. My parents had cleared out the old guest room for me and converted their bright home office into a shared bedroom for the twins. Sunlight spilled through the wide window in the afternoons, making the space feel bigger than it was. The kids set up their little corners. Caleb with his pencils and erasers lined in perfect rows. Maya propping her music stand by the window so she could see the maple tree while she practiced. For a while, we fell into a rhythm that almost felt like healing. I worked long shifts at the pediatric ward, but my parents helped with school drop-offs and pick-ups. Dinners were often eaten together around the oak table I'd known since childhood. There was laughter, sometimes even mine, and nights when the sound of Mia's clarinet drifted down the hallway like a soft promise. Caleb's drawings began to cover the corkboard above his bed, suns with wide smiles, houses with big windows. He always coloured the sky a bright, impossible blue. Still, I couldn't shake certain memories. Growing up, my younger brother Brandon had always been the favoured one. My achievements were expected. His were exceptional. I had learned to take pride in my quiet consistency, to keep my head down and meet expectations without demanding attention. Moving back in brought those old patterns closer than I liked, but I told myself things were different now. I was an adult, and this arrangement was temporary, just until I saved enough for our own place. The kids seemed to bloom in those early weeks. Caleb, usually quiet at school, told me about a new friend in art club. Maya had joined the elementary band, practicing until her cheeks flushed, determined to master the tricky passage in her latest piece. There was light in their eyes, the kind that comes from feeling safe. And for me, there was a relief in knowing they could breathe, really breathe, without the constant tension I'd carried through the divorce. We hung a small savings chart in the bathroom, marking progress toward a goal they could see. Every extra shift I picked up, every dollar we added, brought us closer to our house, the way we'd started calling it. I didn't want them to think of this as permanent. I wanted them to hold on to the idea that stability was something we were building together. There were moments in the quiet of late evenings when I'd stand in the doorway of their room and watch them sleep under the glow of the nightlight. Caleb sometimes clutched a pencil in his hand as if he'd been drawing in his dreams. Maya's clarinet would be neatly packed away, but I could almost hear the echo of her last notes. These were the images I carried with me into the chaos of the hospital, the reminder of why I worked so hard. If there were small cracks in this harbour, I didn't see them clearly then. Or maybe I chose not to. The light through the window was still warm, the air still easy to breathe, and I clung to that because I knew from experience that once the air turns stale, it's hard to get it back. The shift happened quietly at first, like a tide turning under the surface. Brandon and Avery announced they were expecting their first child, and my parents reacted as if they'd been waiting their whole lives for that news. Ellen's eyes shone in a way I hadn't seen in years. Richard started talking about baby-proofing before Avery's first trimester was even over. I congratulated them sincerely. I knew a new baby could be a joy, but a part of me braced for something I couldn't quite name. When Noah was born, the house became a different place. The dining room, where we'd eaten family dinners for decades, was stripped of its table and chairs. In their place appeared a white crib with carved spindles, a matching dresser, and a rocking chair that looked like it had been plucked from a designer showroom. Ellen called it Noah's special space for when they visit, though Brandon and Avery had a 4-bedroom house of their own across town. Boxes from high-end baby boutiques appeared in the hallway, a state-of-the-art stroller that cost more than my first car, a digital baby monitor with multiple cameras, a custom mobile with handmade felt animals. My parents' generosity for Noah seemed boundless. It wasn't that I begrudged my nephew nice things, it was the way their focus narrowed until there was barely room for anything else. I started noticing decisions being made without me, plans for family gatherings, changes to household routines, even the way common areas were rearranged, all discussed in my absence. One Saturday, I came home from a 12-hour shift to find the living room reconfigured. My kids' toy basket, which had sat neatly in one corner, was gone. I found it later in the basement storage room, covered with a dust sheet. When I asked Ellen about it, she smiled as if explaining something obvious. Noah's here more often now, and his naps are so light. We didn't want the noise from those toys waking him. I looked at the basket, blocks, a set of paints, a stuffed fox Caleb had had since he was 4, and felt a heaviness settle in my chest. The twins know how to play quietly, I said, careful to keep my voice neutral. It's just easier this way, she replied, already turning back to the kitchen. It was such a small thing in the grand scheme of everything we'd been through, but it lodged in me like a splinter. The toys weren't just objects. They were a part of my children's daily life, their little sanctuary in a shared space. Taking them away sent a message, intentional or not. Your presence here is conditional, and you can be moved aside when something or someone more important comes along. That night, Caleb sat cross-legged on his bed, sketchpad balanced on his knees. "I can't find my paints," he said without looking up. I told him they were in the basement and offered to get them, but he just shrugged. "It's fine. I'll just draw with pencil." His voice was flat, the spark from earlier weeks dulled. Maya didn't say anything outright, but she practiced her clarinet in their bedroom now, door closed, instead of by the window where she used to play for the whole house. I watched them both shrink in small ways, and I told myself I was imagining it. We were still in the bright room upstairs, they still had their corners, the air was still easy to breathe. But as I lay awake that night, I couldn't stop thinking about that basket of toys in the dark basement, covered like something that no longer belonged. It was the first time since we'd moved in that I felt the ground beneath us shift just a fraction, enough to make me wonder if this harbour wasn't as safe as I wanted to believe. By December, the difference was no longer subtle. Christmas morning laid it bare in a way that left no room for excuses. Caleb and Maya unwrapped sweaters, a few books, and a board game they'd been hinting at for weeks. They smiled politely, said their thank yous, and set their gifts neatly aside. Across the room, Noah's corner looked like the showroom of a toy store, an elaborate train set, a battery-powered ride-on car, a tower of wrapped boxes still waiting to be opened. Ellen and Richard hovered over him, laughing as he tore through the paper, barely glancing at what he revealed before moving on to the next. "It's his first Christmas," Ellen said when she caught me watching. "You only get one first, you know." I bit my tongue. Caleb and Maya had had firsts too, but I didn't remember anyone buying them an entire fleet of toys. The comments about appearances began cropping up more often, always framed as harmless observations. "Noah has Brandon's eyes," Richard would say, beaming. "That's where the charm comes from." Or, "Caleb and Maya look so much like their father." The implication hung in the air that their best features belonged to someone outside this family. One Saturday afternoon, Caleb came home from school clutching a large piece of poster board. "I got into the district art showcase," he told Ellen, holding out his painting of a sunlit street. She didn't even glance at it. "That's nice, dear, but can you keep it off the table? I'm setting up for Noah's snack." The way Caleb's shoulders fell hit me like a weight. He carried the painting upstairs without another word. Maya fared no better. She was practicing jump rope in the backyard one mild winter day when Ellen slid the back door open and called out, "Too noisy, Noah's napping." Maya froze mid-skip. "But he's in the living room," she said. Ellen frowned still. "It's distracting for Avery while she's feeding him." The rope dropped to the ground and Maya went inside without looking at me. It wasn't just the incidents themselves, it was the accumulation. Each slight seemed to chip away at them, invisible but lasting. I could see it in the way Caleb started lingering in his room longer after school. Sketchpad balanced on his knees, but pencil unmoving. Maya's clarinet practice grew shorter, the door always shut. I told myself it was temporary. We had a plan. I was picking up extra shifts, cutting corners, watching our savings chart fill with careful, steady marks. 3 more months, I whispered to myself when the urge to speak up burned in my throat. Just 3 more months. At night, I replayed the moments I'd stayed silent, imagining different responses, standing up, pointing out the unfairness, drawing a line. But each imagined confrontation ended the same way. Tension thick enough to choke on, and my parents withdrawing what little help they were still providing. Without them covering pickups on my long shifts, without their roof over our heads, we'd be in trouble before we had the deposit saved. So I swallowed it. I smiled when Ellen handed me a list of house rules she thought would make things smoother for everyone, though the only new restrictions seemed to apply to my kids. I nodded when Richard joked about how some kids just need more discipline after Maya left a cereal bowl in the sink. I told myself I was protecting Caleb and Maya from open conflict, but I knew I was also protecting our timeline. If we could just make it to spring, I'd sign the lease on a small place of our own. I clung to that image. 3 sets of keys on a ring, sunlight spilling into rooms where my children could play without being shushed. Still, the splinter in my chest was there, pressing deeper. Every time I saw Noah's toys spread across the living room while my children's were hidden away, every time their accomplishments were dismissed or ignored, I felt it. I kept my eyes on the calendar, marking off the days. We were moving toward freedom, but we were still living in the shadow of someone else's spotlight. The breaking point that winter came over something as ordinary as Sunday dinner. Ellen had cooked a full-spread roast chicken, mashed potatoes, steamed carrots. We all sat around the table, Noah in his high chair between Brandon and Avery. For a while, it was the usual small talk, clinking silverware, the kind of background noise that's easy to fade into. Then Noah Midbell picked up his plate of carrots and flung it to the floor. The crash was followed by a chorus of laughter from every adult except me. "He's just exploring," Avery said, brushing a smear of mashed potato from his shirt. Brandon grinned. Future baseball arm right there. Ellen leaned down to coop at him as Richard reached for a napkin. A few minutes later, Caleb, ever polite, looked at the platter of carrots and said quietly, "Could I have some bread instead?" He didn't whine or complain, just asked. Ellen's head snapped toward him. "In this house, we eat what's put in front of us. Don't be ungrateful." I felt my son shrink beside me, his fork lowering without another word. My chest tightened, the kind of ache that comes when you're watching your child learn in real time that fairness isn't guaranteed, not even from family. That night, after the dishes were cleared and the kids were upstairs, I sat on the edge of my bed scrolling through my phone. I opened the Notes app and typed the date, the details of what had happened. Then I went downstairs and took a photo of the living room. Noah's toys scattered across the rug, my children's toy basket still missing from its corner. It felt strange documenting my own home like I was building a case. but some instinct told me I might need these records. Over the next few weeks, I quietly gathered more screenshots of text messages where family plans were changed last minute because Noah needs his nap. Photos of Caleb's artwork relegated to a stack on the counter while the fridge was covered in snapshots of Noah's gummy smile. I didn't know exactly what I would do with them, but having them gave me a small sense of control in a house where I had so little. Then, in early February, I stumbled onto something that made my pulse quicken. Not from anger this time, but from possibility. I'd finished an overnight shift and stopped at the coffee shop near the hospital to decompress before heading home. On the community bulletin board by the door, among flyers for dog walkers and piano lessons, was a printed notice for rent to be our cottage walking distance to schools. Sunfield Rooms fenced yard available May. The photo was small, but it showed a white house with blue shutters, sunlight pooling on the front porch. I tore off one of the contact slips before I could talk myself. Rusted hinges. "Try to get some rest," I told them, forcing a smile. Maya curled up with her blanket, glaring at the shadowed corner where the mold patch darkened the wall. Caleb just nodded, clutching his inhaler. I hated leaving them there, but the alternative was dragging them back upstairs and reigniting the fight. It was just after midnight when I heard the first we'd been lying in bed upstairs, staring at the ceiling when it cut through the quiet, sharp, laboured, unmistakable. I was down the basement steps in seconds. Caleb sat upright in bed, eyes wide, shoulders heaving as he fought for air. "Inhaler," I said, already reaching for it on the nightstand. I guided him through 2 puffs, counted his breaths, then slipped the oximeter onto his finger. His oxygen level was low, but climbing. Maya sat beside him, pale and silent, her hand on his back. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," I muttered it, mostly to myself. When his breathing steadied, I told them both to grab their blankets and come upstairs to the living room for the rest of the night. In the morning, Ellen frowned when she found us there. "Why didn't you just run the heater a bit higher?" she asked, as if this were a minor inconvenience. "Because it's not about the temperature," I said, keeping my tone level. "It's about mold spores, damp air, and a child with asthma." Richard waved a hand. "One little episode isn't the end of the world. He's fine now." I looked at them both, really looked, and saw no hint of concern, only irritation that I was making a fuss. And that's when something inside me shifted, from holding on to the timeline to letting go completely. I knelt down so I was eye level with Caleb and Maya, who were watching the exchange like their lives depended on the outcome. "Pack your bags," I said quietly. Mia blinked. "What?" "Your most important things," I said. "Clothes, anything you can't sleep without. Your schoolwork. We'll come back for the rest later." From behind me, Richard scoffed. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Amanda, stop being so dramatic. No one's asking you to leave." I stood up, still calm. "You just made it clear where my children stand in this family. We deserve better than this." Avery stepped in, Noah on her hip. "It's just a bedroom change. You're overreacting." I turned to her. "Would you call it that if someone moved your baby into a damp, mouldy basement without asking you first?" She didn't answer. Brandon appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "Where do you think you're going to go? You can't afford to move out right now." "That's where you're wrong," I said. "I've been saving since the day we moved in, and 3 weeks ago I signed a lease on a house." The silence that followed was almost satisfying. Within 15 minutes, Caleb and Maya came downstairs with their backpacks. Caleb clutched his sketch pad and inhaler. Mia held her clarinet case like it was part of her. I took one last look at the living room. The toys that weren't theirs scattered across the floor and opened the front door. As we stepped out into the night air, the cold hit my face like a wake-up call. I could feel their eyes on us from the porch, but I didn't look back. The Mac Cam XU was at its peak. Adrenaline, fear, and a fierce clarity. This was the first real step toward freedom, and I wasn't going to hesitate. Nancy opened the door before I'd even knocked twice, her hair pulled back and a quilt draped over one arm. "Come in, all of you," she said, her voice warm and steady like she'd been expecting us. She led us to her spare room, where an air mattress sat beside a neatly made queen bed. I figured the kids could take the air mattress together, she added, setting the quilt down. The change in atmosphere was instant. No toys to tiptoe around that didn't belong to them. No eyes watching for missteps. Caleb sank onto the mattress and flipped open his sketch pad without a word. Maya stood in the middle of the room, breathing in deep like she'd just surfaced from underwater. Nancy had even stocked the kitchen with their favorite cereal and a pint of mint chocolate chip ice cream. "We'll have some after you've settled in," she said with a wink. It was such a small thing, but it made my throat tighten. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, Caleb curled toward the wall. Maya sprawled on her stomach, clutching her clarinet case. I sat at the little desk in NY's den with a blank sheet of paper. The urge to call my parents was strong, but I knew that whatever I said in the heat of this moment would only fuel more accusations that I was overreacting, so I wrote instead. The letter was short, deliberate. I thanked them for the roof they'd provided these past 2 years. I acknowledged the help they had given during my divorce, but I also made it clear moving my children into a damp, unsafe basement without my consent had crossed a line. I explained that we would not be returning to live under their roof, though I was open to rebuilding a relationship under conditions of mutual respect. I didn't ask for their approval. I didn't apologize for protecting my kids. When I finished, I folded the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and left it in my bag to deliver the next day. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the release of finally saying what needed to be said. I slipped back into the guest room, careful not to wake the kids. In the dim light, I could see the rise and fall of their chests, hear the slow, even rhythm of their breathing. It struck me how different it sounded here. No congestion in Caleb's inhale, no tension in Maya's shoulders, just rest. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of a whisper. Maya was sitting up, hair mussed from sleep. "Mom," she murmured. I sat up. "What is it, honey?" She hesitated, then said, "I can breathe here." It was such a simple sentence, but it hit me with the force of everything we'd left behind, the shushing, the cold air, the damp basement walls. Here, she didn't have to measure her voice or her footsteps. Here, Caleb could draw without worrying about where to put his paints. I reached over and smoothed her hair back. "That's how it's supposed to be," I said, "and that's how it's going to stay." When she lay back down, I stayed awake a while longer, memorizing the quiet. It wasn't our home, not yet, but it was the first place in a long time where my children could exist without feeling like they were in the way. For now, that was enough. The next morning, I dropped Caleb and Ma at school and drove straight to my parents' house. I'd decided it was better to collect as much of our stuff as possible while the house was quiet before emotions could spiral out of control. The driveway was empty except for my mother's car. She opened the door with a tight smile. "Come to get a few things?" "Yes," I said evenly. "The kids will need their clothes, school supplies, and some personal items." Her lips thinned, but she stepped aside. I moved through the house quickly, not lingering in the kitchen, where Noah's high chair still sat front and center. In the twins' old room, now stripped bare but for the furniture, there were still traces of them. A paper snowflake taped to the window, one of Caleb's pencil stubs on the floor. I packed methodically, keeping my breath steady. Halfway through loading the car, Susan, my father's sister, arrived. She'd always been a quiet supporter, never openly challenging my parents, but never joining in their favoritism either. Today she looked uneasy. "Can we talk for a second?" she asked, glancing toward the house. We stepped into the front yard. The air was cold enough to sting my cheeks. "I heard Brandon talking to Richard last night," she said in a low voice. "They're planning to stay here until after the holidays, maybe longer." I blinked. After the holidays, his renovation was supposed to be done in a month. Susan shook her head. He said, "There's no rush. Amanda and the kids are fine in the basement." She hesitated. "You know what that means, right? They never planned for you to move back upstairs." Her words landed like a stone in my gut, confirming what I'd already suspected. The basement wasn't temporary, it was where they'd intended to keep my children until we left, no matter how long that took. I managed a thin smile. Thank you for telling me. Are you going to fight it? She asked gently. No, I said, tightening the strap on one of the duffel bags. I'm going to make sure we never have to live here again. What I didn't tell her, what I hadn't told anyone but Nancy, was that the lease was already signed on a small 3-bedroom house across town. Move-in day was set for just over a week away. The utilities were in my name. The first month's rent and deposit paid from months of careful saving and extra shifts. It was more than just an escape plan. It was a new start already waiting for us. I went back inside, keeping my movements calm and deliberate. My mother lingered in the hallway, watching as I carried the twins' belongings out to the car. You know you're overreacting, she said finally. No one's trying to push you out. I met her eyes. You moved my children into a basement so your grandson could have their room. That's not nothing, Mum, and it's not something I'm willing to live with. She looked away, muttering something about family sacrifices. I didn't engage. When the last bag was in the car, I took one last walk through the house, not because I felt sentimental, but to make sure I hadn't left anything essential behind. In the corner of the living room, under a pile of Noah's toys, I spotted one of Maya's sheet music folders. I slipped it into my bag, thinking of her words from the night before. I can breathe here. Driving away, I felt the knot in my chest loosen slightly. They didn't know I had a firm move-out date. They didn't know that the next time I came back here, it would only be to visit on our terms. That knowledge was mine alone, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like I was holding the stronger hand. The week between leaving my parents' house and moving into the new place felt like holding my breath underwater. We were safe at NY's, but my mind was already leaping ahead to everything that needed to be done. Packing the rest of our things, confirming the furniture delivery, double-checking the utility start dates. I tried not to let the anticipation show too much. I wanted the kids to enjoy this in-between time without the constant weight of transition. Mornings were calm in a way I hadn't realized I'd been craving. Maya practiced her clarinet in the living room while Caleb sat at the kitchen table sketching quietly. One afternoon, he showed me his latest drawing, a house with big windows and sunlight streaming in the curtains, billowing like they were caught in a warm breeze. It's called Sun Window, he said, smiling a little. The paper was edged in gold crayon, like the light was spilling beyond the page. That's beautiful, I told him, meaning it. And it wasn't just a picture, it was a wish, one I was determined to grant. 3 days before our move, I was out front helping Nancy clear some leaves from her walkway when her next-door neighbour ambled over. He was in his late 60s, lean and wiry, wearing a faded baseball cap and work boots. Morning, he said. Haven't seen you around before. I'm just staying here for a bit, I replied, wiping my hands on my jeans. He introduced himself as Mr. Delgado, a retired building inspector who still did part-time consulting for the city. When I mentioned I'd been living at my parents' place until recently, he asked where they lived. When I told him, his brows went up. That's over on Willow Street, right? Big colonial with the detached garage. That's the one, he nodded knowingly. I inspected that basement years ago for a water damage claim. You know, it's not legally a habitable space, right? No proper egress window, moisture levels off the charts, wouldn't meet code even with renovations. The words sank in slowly. I'd known in my gut the basement was unsafe, but hearing it confirmed by someone whose job was literally to assess those risks lit a spark in my chest. Yeah, I said carefully, I'm aware. If anyone's using it as a bedroom, that's a big violation, he added, dangerous for kids, especially with respiratory issues. I thought of Caleb, his shallow breaths that first night down there, the way the air had smelled faintly of mold. My jaw tightened, but I didn't say more. I wasn't interested in launching a legal battle or sicking code enforcement on my parents. That would only deepen the rift. And right now, my focus was on getting my children into a safe, permanent home. Still, his words gave me something I hadn't realized I needed. Validation. I wasn't imagining the danger. I wasn't overreacting. I'd been right to get them out. When I went back inside, Maya was working through a tricky section of her music, cheeks flushed with concentration. Caleb was shading the corners of his sun window drawing, adding tiny potted plants on the sill. I stood there for a moment, watching them in the soft afternoon light, and felt the smallest release of tension in my chest. We were so close now, just a few more days, and that sunlight on Caleb's page would be real. Move-in day dawned bright. The kind of early spring morning where the air is still cool, but the sunlight feels like a promise. Nancy and a couple of my co-workers arrived early to help load the last of our things. The twins buzzed with excitement, darting between the car and the porch with armfuls of boxes. When we pulled up to the house, I saw it again. The small white frame with blue shutters, the tidy yard edged with daffodils someone else had planted seasons ago. It wasn't big, but it felt like it had been waiting for us. Inside, the light was the first thing I noticed. It streamed through the living room windows, spilling across the hardwood floors and warming the walls. Caleb set his sketch pad down on the windowsill immediately, running his fingers over the glass as if to make sure it was real. "This is the spot," he said, smiling to himself. The furniture delivery came mid-morning and the house slowly took shape. Beds in the right rooms, a kitchen table in the corner that caught the afternoon sun, a couch angled toward the view of the backyard. Maya claimed the smallest bedroom, insisting she liked the way the sunrise would hit her music stand in the mornings. Caleb took the room at the back, where the light was softer, perfect for drawing. By late afternoon, everything essential was in place. We ordered pizza from the shop down the street, the kind that comes in oversized boxes with the cheese still bubbling. We sat cross-legged on the living room floor, paper plates balanced on our knees, laughing as Maya tried to teach Caleb how to fold a slice. The Rye Kit Drake. For the first time in months, I ate without the knot in my stomach tightening after every bite. That night, after the kids were asleep in their own beds, I stood in the middle of the living room and just listened. No footsteps pacing above me, no television blaring shows I hadn't chosen, no undercurrent of tension humming through the air, just the creak of the house settling and the soft rustle of wind outside. The next day at the hospital, my nurse manager called me into her office. "Rachel, you've been stepping up a lot lately," she said. "We're opening a charge nurse position on the pediatric ward, and I think you'd be a great fit." For a moment, I could only blink at her. Charge nurse meant better pay, steadier hours, and a say in how the unit was run. It meant more time at home, more evenings where I could help with homework instead of waving goodbye on my way to a night shift. "I'd be honored," I said finally. Walking out of her office, I realized that in the space of 2 days, my life had pivoted. Home stability, and now the possibility of a job that would make both even more secure. That evening, while I was unpacking a box of dishes, my phone buzzed with a text from Susan. "Brandon and Avery are having a hard time. Without you there, your mum's exhausted trying to keep up with Noah and the house. They didn't realize how much you were doing." I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling a complicated tangle of emotions. Part of me wanted to say, "Of course they didn't realize." Another part, a quieter, more cautious part, hoped this might be the start of them seeing me differently, not as a perpetual backup plan, but as someone whose presence mattered. 2 days later, Susan called. "Brandon's been over here twice this week asking if you'd consider coming back for a while." "Just until the renovations are done," she said. I almost laughed. "Tell him thanks, but we're settled." "Thought you might say that," she replied, a smile in her voice. "But it's interesting watching them scramble. Your mum even mentioned she might have handled things differently if she'd known what it would be like without you. I didn't let that sink too deep. Regret was easier to voice than change was to make, but it was something. Maybe distance would do what confrontation never could." That night, as Caleb taped his sun window drawing to the wall above his bed, and Maya filled her room with the sound of her clarinet, I thought about how different our days felt now. No one was shushing them, No one was measuring their worth against someone else's. We were in a place where light reached every corner, and for the first time, I believed it could stay that way. It was a quiet Saturday morning when I saw my parents' car pull into the driveway. Caleb and Maya were at the kitchen table working on a puzzle, their heads bent close together, the late morning sun spilling over them. I stood at the sink, rinsing a mug, watching Ellen and Richard step out of their sedan in matching windbreakers, their movements stiff in the early chill. I opened the door before they could knock. "Hi," I said, my voice neutral. Ellen's eyes darted past me into the house. "It's smaller than I imagined," she said, not unkindly, but with that faint tone of assessment she always carried. Richard cleared his throat. "We thought we'd stop by and talk." I gestured toward the living room. They sat side by side on the couch while I remained standing, leaning lightly on the armchair. Caleb and Maya stayed in the kitchen, but I knew they were listening. Richard started. "We've been thinking about, well, the way things happened. It's been harder than we expected without you there. Maybe it's time to come home." The words were careful, but the subtext was clear. "We want the help back." I took a slow breath. "If by home you mean your house, that's not going to happen unless certain conditions are met. The most important is that Caleb and Maya are treated with the same respect and consideration as Noah. No more moving them to unsafe spaces. No more dismissing their achievements." Ellen's brows knit together. "You make it sound like we don't love them. Love isn't just a feeling. I said it's the choices you make every day and the way you show people they matter. Right now, the kids feel like they rank below their cousin in your eyes. That can't happen again." Richard shifted in his seat. "We could try maybe start with a dinner, all of us together like before." I hesitated. The part of me that wanted to protect the peace screamed to say no, but another part, the one that knew Caleb and Maya would eventually have to navigate a relationship with their grandparents, saw an opportunity if it was on my terms. "One dinner," I said, "at your house or here doesn't matter, but we set some ground rules. Everyone speaks respectfully to and about each other. If there's a disagreement, we handle it calmly and no one dismisses the kids' interests or achievements." Ellen opened her mouth, then closed it as if she was tasting the words before letting them out. "Right," she said finally. We agreed on the following Friday evening at my parents' house. As they left, Maya came to the doorway. "Do we have to?" she whispered. I crouched down so we were eye level. "Just one dinner. We'll go in together, and if it gets uncomfortable, we'll leave together. This is just a chance to see if things can be different." All week, I kept my expectations low, but my boundaries firm. At work, the thought of the upcoming dinner ran in the background like an anxious hum. I distracted myself by diving into the charge nurse prep, shadowing the current lead, reviewing protocols, mapping out ideas for team communication. It helped to remember that no matter what happened at that dinner, our lives had already changed in ways that couldn't be undone. When Friday came, the twins dressed neatly. Maya in a navy sweater, Caleb in a button-down that made him look older than 10. I reminded them in the car. "We're guests, but we're also family. We speak kindly, and we expect the same in return. If that doesn't happen, we go home." Walking into my parents' house felt surreal, like stepping back into a play I'd already closed the curtain on. The familiar smell of Ellen's roast chicken filled the air, the table set with her best dishes. Brandon and Avery were there. Noah perched on Brandon's hip, chattering in toddler speak. For the first few minutes, everything was fine, polite even. Ellen asked Caleb about his art, and he told her about the sun window drawing, now hanging above his bed. Maya mentioned an upcoming band concert, and Avery actually asked a follow-up question about her music. It was the first flicker of hope I'd felt toward this side of the family in months. We took our seats, passing dishes and making small talk. The atmosphere was tentative but calm. Like everyone was aware of the unspoken truths, I kept my guard up, but for the first time, I let myself think. Maybe this could work. The Mac Cam-X lifted, subtle but noticeable, a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, we could build something better than what we'd left behind. Halfway through the meal, I noticed Noah squirming in his booster seat. His cheeks flushed a deeper pink than the warmth of the dining room could explain. He pushed his plate away and whimpered, a thin thread of sound that drew every adult's eyes. Avery reached over. "What's wrong, buddy?" But before he could answer, his body stiffened and his small hands jerked uncontrollably. The room froze. Brandon's fork clattered to the table. "What's happening? I was already moving. He's seizing," I said, my voice low but firm. Brandon lay him on the floor gently. Now they obeyed without question, panic written across their faces. I knelt beside Noah, tilting him onto his side to keep his airway clear, sliding a folded napkin under his head. "Someone check the time," I said. Richard's voice trembled. "It's 6:42. I kept my eyes on Noah, counting his breaths, watching for any sign of obstruction. "Stay back. Give him space. He's still breathing. Brandon, loosen his collar." The seconds stretched heavy with the sound of shallow gasps and the occasional clink of a glass as someone's hand shook. At just under 2 minutes, the jerking slowed, his small frame relaxing into stillness. His breathing steadied, though his eyelids fluttered, disoriented. "We need to get his temperature down," I said, glancing at Avery. "Cold compresses now, and call his pediatrician. Tell them exactly what happened." Ellen returned from the kitchen with a damp towel, her face pale. She crouched beside me, handing it over like it was a lifeline. Within 15 minutes, Noah was lying on the couch, drowsy but stable, his forehead cooler under the cloth. Avery sat nearby, her hand resting on his leg, eyes glassy. Brandon stood by the armrest, still pale, like the adrenaline hadn't quite drained from his system. "Was that dangerous?" Ellen asked quietly, almost afraid to hear the answer. "It could have been," I said. "Febrile seizures aren't uncommon in kids, but they still require monitoring. You did the right thing by not trying to hold him down." Richard cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. "You knew exactly what to do. You didn't even hesitate. This is my job," I said simply. Though it wasn't just training, it was instinct. When a child is in trouble, you move. For a moment, the room was silent except for the low hum of the heater. Then Ellen said, "Rachel, thank you." Her voice cracked on the words. I nodded, accepting the gratitude, but not letting it blur the lines I'd drawn. "I'm glad I could help, but this doesn't change the fact that my kids need to be treated fairly. That's non-negotiable." She met my gaze, and for the first time in months, I didn't see defensiveness there, just something softer, more uncertain. After dessert, Brandon carried a still sleepy Noah to the car. Avery followed, murmuring a quiet thank you as she passed me. Richard lingered, picking at an invisible thread on his cuff. "We might have underestimated you," he admitted finally. "You've always underestimated me," I said, not unkindly. "That's why I had to leave." As they drove away, Maya slipped her hand into mine. "You saved him," she said. "I helped him through something scary," I corrected gently. "That's what we do for people, even if things are complicated." The Matcam XU had surged to its peak. Adrenaline, fear, urgency, and now it eased into something warmer. I had proven, without intending to, that my value in this family wasn't conditional. But even in that warmth, the boundaries stayed firm. This dinner hadn't been about proving myself. It had been about protecting my kids. And that part would never change. By early summer, the rhythms of our new life had settled into something steady and bright. Caleb's art teacher called one afternoon to tell me his son window drawing had been selected for the local youth art exhibition. When I told him, his eyes widened and then crinkled into the kind of smile that still caught me off guard. Open, unguarded, proud. The evening of the show, he stood in front of his framed piece in the gallery, his hair smoothed down for the occasion, explaining to a curious stranger how he'd layered the gold crayon to make the light look alive. Maya hovered nearby, her clarinet case slung over her shoulder, ready to head to her own band rehearsal after the event. She'd made it into the school's advanced band. Her name on the roster like a quiet declaration, "I belong here." At work, my role as charge nurse had officially begun. The first weeks were intense, balancing staff schedules, coordinating with physicians, managing the EB and flow of the pediatric floor. But it was the kind of challenge that felt expansive rather than draining. My shifts ended earlier now, and more often than not. I was home in time to make dinner with the twins, music or laughter spilling from their rooms. It would have been easy to believe the storm behind us had passed completely, but family history has a way of finding the cracks, even when you've built new walls. One Saturday in July, Susan called me. "Just a heads up," she said, her voice low. "I overheard Aunt Linda telling someone at a barbecue that you left your parents' house in a fit of anger, that you stormed out because you didn't like sharing space with your brother's family." I felt my jaw tighten. That's not what happened, and she knows it. "She's telling it like you overreacted," Susan continued, "and that the basement thing was just temporary and you made a big scene for nothing." For a moment, the familiar frustration rose, hot and insistent. But then I remembered the folder tucked into my desk drawer at home, the one I'd started months ago, back when the favoritism was still subtle but insidious. Inside were photos of the basement, the mold on the wall, the texts from Caleb and Maya, the day their beds were moved, notes from my phone detailing each incident. I hadn't collected them to shame anyone. I'd collected them so that if the story was twisted, I could protect the truth. "I've got it covered," I told Susan. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table while the kids worked on a puzzle in the living room. I opened the folder and sifted through its contents. There was the shot of Caleb's toy basket hidden in the basement storage. The note from Ellen about making sacrifices so Noah could have the vet room, the time-stamped text from Maya. "This is not fair." It wasn't anger I felt as I looked through them now, it was clarity. The next day, I called Aunt Linda. My voice was calm. "I heard you've been talking about why we left Mum and Dad's. I'd appreciate it if you stopped telling it like it was a tantrum. If you need the details, I can send you documentation." There was a pause on the line. "Documentation?" she echoed. "Yes," I said. "Photos, texts, notes, all dated. I'm not interested in a fight, but I won't let the truth be rewritten." She mumbled something about just repeating what she'd heard and ended the call quickly. I didn't expect an apology, but I knew the rumor would wither now that she understood there was evidence. When I hung up, I felt a steady kind of satisfaction. Not triumph, just the assurance that our story wouldn't be erased. That night, as we sat down to dinner, Caleb asked if I'd come to his next art club meeting to help him plan for the fall show. Maya chimed in, asking if I could record her solo for a competition submission. I said yes to both without checking my work schedule first because I could now. Later, as I washed dishes, I thought about the life we'd built here. The boundaries I'd set weren't just about keeping harmful behavior out. They were about making space for this light, music, the easy rhythm of belonging. And as long as I kept holding those lines, we'd keep choosing this light over and over again. It was late August when my parents came by unannounced. The air outside still held the weight of summer, but inside our house was cool, the curtains drawn just enough to let in soft afternoon light. Caleb was at the kitchen table working on a new sketch, and Maya was in her room, the faint notes of her clarinet drifting down the hall. Ellen stood on the porch for a moment before knocking. Richard hovered behind her, hands in his pockets. I opened the door and let them in, wary but willing to listen. We sat in the living room, me in the armchair, them on the couch where the late sun streaked across the cushions. Ellen spoke first. "We've been thinking a lot about what happened last year." She glanced at Richard before continuing. "I didn't realize how much we were hurting the kids. I thought I was just helping your brother, but I see now that it came at their expense." It wasn't a full apology, but it was the closest she'd come, and I recognized the effort it must have taken for her to say it. Richard cleared his throat. "I may have been too quick to dismiss your concerns. I thought you were just being sensitive, but you were protecting them. And you were right about the basement. It wasn't safe." He looked at me, holding my gaze longer than usual. "I'm proud of you, Rachel. You've built something here on your own." The words caught me off guard. I'd spent years wishing for that kind of acknowledgement, and had stopped expecting it long before I moved out. Now hearing it felt like a door cracking open, not wide enough to erase the past, but enough to let in a little more light. I appreciate you saying that, I replied, but understand this works because we have boundaries. Caleb and Maya deserve to feel safe and valued, no matter where they are. Ellen nodded, her expression more thoughtful than defensive. We want to do better, she said quietly. We talked a little longer about Caleb's upcoming art events, Mears's music competitions, and my new role at the hospital. They didn't linger. When they left, it was with a promise to see us at the kids' next performances. That weekend, I hung Caleb's framed sun window, drawing in the living room above the spot where the afternoon light poured in. The gold crayon in the picture caught the real sunlight, making it seem to glow from within. Caleb stood beside me, his hands in his pockets, looking at it with a quiet pride. It's like the room in the picture is part of our house now, he said. Maya came in from the backyard, clarinet in hand. Can I practice in here? She asked, already setting up her stand by the window. She launched into her solo, the notes clear and confident, filling the space that had once been silent or shushed. I sat back on the couch watching them both, Caleb with his art, Maya with her music, and felt the Mac Camsook reach its final peak. Not the sharp surge of adrenaline or confrontation, but the steady sustaining lift of knowing we were exactly where we belonged. The air in the room felt open, easy. We could breathe here, really breathe, not because someone allowed it, but because we had chosen this place, this light, this life. As the last notes of Maya's clarinet faded and the sun dipped lower, casting long, warm shadows across the floor, I realized that this was the true ending to the story we'd been living. Not the day we walked out of my parents' house, but the day we filled our own with light and respect, and decided never to let go of either. Let go.